Here is Scott Morrison right now. Let's listen in.
And in previous parliaments who have asked me in the past to lead them for the faith that they have placed in me. Mr Speaker, I am proud of my achievements in this place, and I am proud of my government, Mr Speaker. I am proud, Mr Speaker, at a time of extreme trial, my government stood up and faced the abyss of uncertainty that our country looked into, and the coercion of a regional bully, and saw Australia through the storm. Australia emerged stronger under my government. I have no intention now, Mr Speaker, of submitting to the political intimidation of this government using its numbers in this place to impose its retribution on a political opponent. In addressing the matters that are the subject of the motion, I repeat that I have welcomed and support the recommendations of the Bell inquiry, and I note the following facts for the House. The authorities to administer departments were established as a dormant redundancy, only to be activated in extraordinary circumstances, evidenced by the fact that no powers were exercised under these authorities, except in the case of the PEP 11 decision, as such circumstances were not realised and therefore none of these authorities were misused. The Solicitor-General found that the authorities established to administer departments in this way were valid and were not unlawful. Other than in the case of the PEP 11 decision, ministers exercised their portfolio authorities fully, without intervention or the threat of intervention, and departments supported their ministers in that capacity without uncertainty regarding their ministerial authorities. As Prime Minister, I did not act as minister or engage in any co-minister arrangements as suggested, including requiring the receipt of any parallel briefing or co-authorising arrangements, except in the very specific case of the PEP 11 decision and not otherwise for that department. On the PEP 11 matter, this was done lawfully from first principles, and I consider my decision was the correct one. My intent to exercise these powers was also advised to the minister in advance of exercising those powers. The ministry list tabled in Parliament referenced, as it does, that ministers may be sworn to administer additional departments. The requirements requiring notice purported to constitute convention in the motion were not identified or recognised by officials advising on these matters from the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and cannot therefore be clearly regarded as established convention. The Solicitor-General found there is no consistent practice for the publication in the Gazette of appointments to administer particular departments of state. The Bell inquiry noted there was a different understanding of the process of publication between myself and the department, and that no instruction was given by me as Prime Minister or my office not to publish those arrangements in the Gazette. In relation to communication with my ministerial colleagues on these matters, I note that I've addressed these issues privately with my colleagues and publicly in my statement of August 16, 2022. I also note, as is particularly relevant to this House and this motion, that I was present each and every day at that dispatch box, Mr Speaker, to answer any and all questions in this House regularly directed to me as Prime Minister on all matters involving all portfolios that were the subject of the Bell inquiry and indeed all other portfolios. The suggestion that as Prime Minister I was not available to do so in this House, or that the opposition failed to ask such questions in those portfolios, is absurd and completely false. I also note that in my earlier portfolio responsibilities, where I was sworn to hold the office of Treasurer, Minister for Social Services and Minister for Immigration and Border Protection, my appointments as Minister of State specifically make reference in the documents authorised by the Governor-General that I was sworn to hold the office as Minister in each of these portfolios. In my appointment as a Minister of State to administer the departments, that were the subject of the Bell inquiry, this was not the case. The documentation authorised by the Governor-General carefully does not include any reference to being sworn to hold the office of minister for any of the portfolios that were the subject of the Bell inquiry, simply to administer the department. Mr Speaker, this can be seen in Appendix A at pages 107 to 110 of the Bell inquiry report. This is a very important distinction. Just because a minister is sworn to administer a department does not mean they hold the office of minister in that portfolio. Mr Speaker, other government departments, Mr Speaker, the contention that the public would also be popularly under the impression that the Prime Minister did not have authority over government departments is extremely unlikely. Furthermore, the proposition that the public would not hold the Prime Minister accountable for the actions of the government is also not credible and counter to the argument that was put forward by the opposition when I was Prime Minister each and every day that I sat in this House. But returning to the issue of being sworn, I was not sworn to hold the office of any of those ministerial portfolios, and as a result, any contention that I served as minister of those portfolios in that office is false. On the substantive matters, I return to those now. In each of the decisions taken during my time as Prime Minister to administer departments, I note again that our nation faced the greatest challenges we had experienced since the Second World War. A drought, natural disasters, a global pandemic, the global and domestic recession, the pandemic cause, and a rising and assertive China seeking to coerce Australia into submission. These were extremely challenging times. To put the economic challenge in context, according to the IMF, during the first year of the pandemic, the global economy shrank by 3.1%. This is more than 30 times the magnitude of the economic decline during the global financial crisis of 2009. That was a crisis. During this period, we were fighting for our very survival from a public health, economic and national security perspective. As Prime Minister, I sought to exercise my responsibilities during this extremely difficult period in a manner that would best advance and protect Australia's national interests and the welfare of the Australian people. That is what I had pledged to do. And I am pleased that through these efforts and the efforts of so many others I work with closely, Australia was able to emerge from this period of significant crisis in a safer and more prosperous position than almost any other country in the world, Mr Speaker. That was the objective of my government, Mr Speaker, and together with my colleagues here and who's formerly sat with us, that was achieved.